Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Lockdown Theater, Entertainment for the Homebound. Tonight is a very special episode of Lockdown Theater because we are commemorating the 30th anniversary of a film that was released on this day back in 1990. The film was a worldwide smash hit and catapulted a young actress into the stratosphere of movie superstardom. The actress is, of course, Julia Roberts, and the movie is, of course, Pretty Woman. Now, Pretty Woman, as you may or may not know, was an updating of George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, which had also been adapted into My Fair Lady. And I remember seeing this movie in 1990 in the theater and with a couple of high school friends. And I remember watching the movie and thinking, it's nothing great. I mean, this movie isn't really that, I don't see what all the fuss is about. And then when the movie ended and it faded to black, I remember turning to my friend and saying, that was the best movie I've ever seen. Now, I'm not really entirely sure that that's true anymore, but what it does do is it speaks to the power that this movie has and the effect that it has and continues to have 30 years later, which is interesting because when you think about it, you know, Pretty Woman from a technical standpoint isn't that great of a movie. I mean, it's not very imaginatively directed. It was directed by Gary Marshall, who had done The Flamingo Kid and Beaches, among other films. The screenplay by J.F. Lawton isn't anything great. I mean, yes, of course, it does have its share of zingers that have now become part of the cultural lexicon, as it were. You know, big, huge. It does have its moments, but it's not anything great otherwise. And, you know, it's just kind of a very by-the-numbers plot, a romantic comedy plot. I mean, you know exactly how the movie is going to end the second these two characters meet. So there's no real suspense or there's no real surprise there. What the movie does have, other than a great soundtrack, is the chemistry between Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. Now, I cannot overstate enough how important that chemistry is to the success of Pretty Woman. These two actors seem to have this connection that emanates from the screen. I mean, it's really something to behold, and you don't get that very often in films. I mean, you think back, you think maybe Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy had that sort of chemistry, or Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner in the 80s might have had something like that. I mean, it's just, they genuinely seem to enjoy each other's company, both as actors and as characters. And that chemistry pops off of the screen, and it's unforced, natural, and just flows organically from the actors off the screen. And it's something that's really beautiful and unique to watch. And watching the movie for the chemistry alone is worth it. Of course, this movie is also the one that made Julia Roberts a superstar practically overnight. I mean, quite literally. Don't forget, this was back in 1990 before cell phones had become such a dominant part of our society, and no one had. I mean, the internet wasn't even a glimmer in anybody's eye, and so it was all, you know, like tabloids and talk shows and newspapers and that kind of magazines. And so it was really very much an overnight success. I mean, of course, she was, you know, on an upward trajectory in her career anyway. I mean, she had made a movie called Blood Red, which nobody saw, which was with her brother, Eric Roberts. She had done Satisfaction, which was supposed to be Justine Bateman from Family Ties, her big break into film stardom. Didn't quite work out that way. And she had made Mystic Pizza, which, you know, is fun. Before Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts had come off a Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination for Steel Magnolias. Pretty Woman would actually give her a Best Actress nomination as well. So her career was pretty much, you know, on the upward trajectory anyway, but Pretty Woman just really fast-tracked that overnight, and she really did become this superstar. And it was, you don't really get that kind of star-making performance nowadays anyway. I mean, you think back in thinking maybe Rita Hayworth had that in Gilda in the 40s. And then you could argue that Leonardo DiCaprio had the same kind of experience with Titanic. He had been around. He had done What's Eating Gilbert Grape and Romeo and Juliet, among other things. But it was really Titanic that threw him into the superstar area. And after Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts went on to do Sleeping with the Enemy, which was terrible. But because she was in it, it made a ton of money. And then she ended up doing, Dying Young, which I never saw, and all sorts of other things, and including Mary Riley, which I think is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but that's a different Lockdown Theater. But the film really does rest on the chemistry between the two of them, and it's a beautiful thing to watch, and it really puts a smile on your face, as any romantic comedy should, but it does it without you even knowing it. Just watching them together makes you smile, and it's very sweet thing to watch, and it's a very unique thing to watch. So that is all I got on Pretty Woman. I wrote a review on Pretty Woman a couple years ago on my website, thefourthreel.com, which I will link to if you want to read that as well. And thanks for tuning into this episode of Lockdown Theater. I don't know what I'm going to be watching next, but stay tuned for episode 5. And until then, be good to each other and be safe.